Did your vote count last week? A lot of people didn't go, but for those who showed up, they made some big decisions.
Yeah, this week we had runoff elections here in the state of Oklahoma, and I think the biggest winner in the runoff elections was people that didn't vote. I wish that I could say, and I don't want to take anything away from those that are moving on to the ballot in November, but the fact of the matter is less than 25% of Oklahomans that are registered to vote actually took part in this election. If you look at the statewide elections in particular, statewide elections that were won on runoff night that are going to be on the ballot in November was only 8% of the total vote. So that means that 92% of people either voted for someone else or didn't vote at all, and didn't vote at all won by a landslide. We have a big problem in our state with people that aren't voting and aren't paying attention to elections, and you're going to get what you don't do when that's the case.
I know at some point we might have a discussion about that ranked voting, but the fact is not a lot of people showed up, but there were some interesting results.
Well, you did have about 25% of the Republican electorate show up to vote, which isn't awful for a primary election runoff. I think one of the things we do want more participation. Obviously, we need to look at shrinking the voting days so we don't vote on as many days, and we need to look at making those holidays once we shrink them down. But one takeaway that not enough people are talking about is Governor Kevin Stitt went 11 for 12 in his endorsements. Whatever you do, that's a number that people should look at, and it should make sense. That should take heed of that. I do think we do things to get the voter turnout up, but I also want to congratulate everybody that made it through. This was the hardest fought primary season I've ever seen.
It was a pretty tough one out there, pretty brutal, but there are a lot of, we're on to November, and when we're on to November, make your picks early.
Well, this isn't even hard. I mean, I think Governor Stitt's going to cruise to re-election. I think you're going to see a Republican sweep. I think you won't have any real hard parts in the Mark Wayne Mullen, James Langford races. They're going to cruise. What's going to get interesting is the county elections in Oklahoma County, and those are going to be turnout driven. Those are going to be, what are people going to do to show a vision for a future? And I think people are going to be looking more at a federal government that is just out of control and doesn't appear to have any idea what it's doing. That will definitely be an anchor around Democrats. The fact that the feds can't seem to do anything on inflation, can't seem to have any long-term plans, they're going to have a hard time dealing with that.
Time to take your espresso hit. He said, he used the I word. Your thoughts about November?
Yeah, I think November is going to be really exciting. I hope that we'll have a high voter turnout. I think that if Oklahoma really wants to set a vision for the future, then people need to get out and participate in that vision. On the Democratic side, for the first time ever in the history of the state, all of the high-profile statewide elected seats, Democrats have put women forward for those. I think that that women voters are going to have a big say here in Oklahoma. If you look just to the north in Kansas, in their runoff elections, women played a big role in the electorate up in Kansas. I think that you could see that down here in Oklahoma as well. I think it's going to be exciting in November.
It will be exciting. Hey, coming up, what's that old saying about glass houses? We'll tell you when we come back. In case you were keeping score, the president we went out and did a campaign promise, fulfilled one this week when he cut student debt. A lot of response by Republicans all over the country and in Oklahoma. Your thoughts about the Biden student debt cancellation?
Well, I'm going to take this a little bit a different way. Of course, this is blatantly unconstitutional. It's hard to even argue. The president himself said he doesn't have the power to do this without Congress. Of course, it's patently absurd. Debt doesn't just go away. The difference is you and I are paying for it as opposed to somebody else paying for it. But here's the part that just is so frustrating with me with the federal government. Not only do we have out-of-control inflation and they're kicking all this money back into the economy, but they have literally zero plan to stop this from happening again. No one is talking about what are we going to do in 20, 30 years. I agree college expenses are out of control, out of control. We're buying votes, we're admitting there's a problem, and we're admitting we don't care about inflation. Like now they're just flaunting it to the American public. But we have no plan to deal with it. It's humiliating for the federal government right now. This is ridiculous.
If you haven't seen Dr. Burge's interview on Hot Seat yesterday, he talks all about this. But, you know, sometimes when we're having these discussions, people should just not comment on it because, well, things in their past.
Yeah, well, what they say is if you've been in politics long enough, you're going to end up being a hypocrite. For those of our federal delegation that are talking about how ridiculous that is, I'd like to remind everyone that at least 2 of our congressmen took over $1 million of their debt and had it canceled by the federal government. Someone's always going to pay to cancel someone else's debt. That's how D.C. works. I will agree with my colleague on this, that higher education right now, the costs are literally out of control on this. We should be having a real robust conversation about how much higher ed costs. Is it worth it for students that are going to pay that much to go and get education? And are they going to get a job on the back end of it that helps them pay off what they take out in loans? We should have a real conversation about that, not just about this debt.
You know, sometimes the best comment is just not to make one, okay, on certain situations. Meanwhile, there are a lot of stories we haven't been able to cover because of the elections. Most important ones to you.
Yeah, I think a huge one, and we'll talk about it more on the show going forward, is Oklahoma City Public Schools is going to have a bond election in November. It's a huge deal for Oklahoma City Public Schools. Look, there's been a lot of discussion right now about education in Oklahoma and how bad things are. Let me tell you, as a parent of 2 kids in OKCPS, the future is bright for our students, but we have to support them financially. So I'll be a big proponent of pushing for this bond in Oklahoma City that's going to be on the ballot in November. And the last thing I'll say that was coming forward is I just want us at home to remember fallen sergeant and sheriff's deputies that we lost this last week. My good friend Tommy Johnson has done a great job supporting the sheriffs, and I just want to make sure that we pray for those families.
Everybody was touched by that this week, and we'll talk more about criminal justice in the future. But right now, there are some things that we've kind of forgotten about.
Well, and my heart does go out to Tommy Johnson. I'm so thankful for his leadership, but especially the families of those deputies. And 2 things that we're not talking about right now. House is going to come back in, the Senate going to come back in hopefully into September, 1st of October. We're going to divide up some of the ARPA monies. That will be coming up. It will be big. But here's the key, too. When we come up, we need to do what the House and the governor have already done, which is cut taxes. You should not be paying for your grocery tax anymore. When we come back in, we should do it, and we shouldn't raise taxes to do it. We should come in, cut the grocery tax, cut the income tax, give you back some of your money. We will have an opportunity to do that into September, 1st of October, and we shouldn't raise taxes to get that done. We should just cut them.
Oh, yeah, there's a special session. I forgot all about that. Well, not really. See this again at news9.com/yourvotecounts, and follow me on Twitter @MitchellTalks.